Welcome to the Law of One Study Group, Teachings of Unity, Love, and Light. Welcome, my sisters and brothers. I am Robert. It is such a pleasure to be able to speak with you. It is my honor to share with you conscious channeling of LL research. The question tonight is, conspicuously absent in the philosophy of the raw contact is any mention of the surrender of the conscious self to a guidance, intelligence, or will greater than its own, be it the higher self, love and light, or the Creator. Where is there room for God's grace and surrender in Ra's philosophy? If surrender is suggested in Ra's philosophy, to what does an entity surrender? We are known to you as the principle of QO. Greetings in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator, in whose service we come to you this evening. Our hearts are full of gratitude that you should call us to your circle of seeking to respond to the question of the place of grace and surrender in the path of the Law of One. We are delighted to share our thoughts with you upon this subject. And as always, please use your discernment as to what you hear that we say. In this way, we do not infringe upon your free will. Thank you. The question before us has to do with the place of surrender or grace in the system of philosophy or thinking that we have offered through this channel previously. Firstly, we shall remark that the philosophy or system of thinking which is sometimes known as the Law of One or the Confederation philosophy possesses a singular, unitary consciousness in which all parts are interactive and all things are one. If all things are one, to what shall any soul surrender? This is why there is no mention of such a surrender within our thoughts, which we share with you. Now let us look at the way of the world, as we might call that world in which it would seem that there is a self that is error-prone, and there is a separate Creator which is perfect. This imperfection is contrasted and separate from perfection. The human self of third density is set apart from the Creator of that third density soul. There are two basic ways in which those of your culture choose to make the demarcation between the human and the divine. The first is that of the Christian, the Jewish, and the Islamic religions, or philosophical systems, if you will, in which there is required of the sinner a repentance and a surrender of the human self in order to worship adore, and be redeemed by a God or the creatorship of the Messiah or the God named Allah, whose prophet is Muhammad. This system of demarcation of human and divine takes its flavor from the male energy of the God name invoked in all three religious systems. The forerunners to these religions were systems of myth and magic, in which there were sacrifices of animals and, in some cases, humans, so that the blood might ascend to the heavens and please the perfect Creator, which then would smile upon the sinning and erroneous human. The human, then, was redeemed to divinity through the sacrifice of an innocent, be it the animal or the virgin human. In your Holy Bible, there is the figure of Abraham being ordered by the Creator to sacrifice his son Isaac. Not questioning the Creator in any way, Abraham builds a fire, sets the wood, sets the tinder ready to light the fire, then binds his son to the fire to make a human sacrifice, as requested by the Creator. At the last instant, a ram is found, caught in a thicket. Isaac is set free, and the ram takes the son's place. In the New Testament, the son is not so lucky. There is no ram in Jerusalem, and Jesus the Christ is crucified upon Golgotha. In both testaments, the figure is the same, one innocent to die in order to redeem all of sinful humanity. Over against this type of demarcation between human and divine, one may gaze at the system of Buddhism and Hinduism, in which the erroneous human is set over against emptiness, nothingness, release, rest, and freedom from suffering. In this figure, each entity becomes the Christ, sacrificing its selfhood entirely in order to become free of all suffering, and thereby free of the wheel of karma and endless incarnations. What these two systems have in common is a carefully split betwixt humanity and divinity, or the profane and the sacred. Within the law of one, no such demarcation exists. Rather, it is persisted that each entity within third density has the one infinite Creator at the heart of every fiber of its being. The mystery of the law of one is that Implicit within the egg of humanity is the full-grown creature of Godhead. And implicit within the Creator is that sending forth of those seeds of self into illusion in order to gather information concerning its own identity. This does not mean that the concepts of surrender and grace have no relevance to the law of one, but rather that the process of spiritual evolution is seen in this model of seeking the truth to be a journey inward. There is no reaching outside of self, but rather the initiation to seek the heart of self, which is the one infinite creator. This is a model which your culture seems not to be able to support, and which consensus reality itself finds it's difficult to understand. Your culture cannot see the infinite value of the self, or assume that perfection lies within the self, which is always seen as prone to error and foolish and flawed in many ways. Consensus reality has no entrance into a system of thought which persists the perfection of humanity, for it is quite obvious when one gazes upon oneself or another being that neither oneself nor another being either expresses perfection or contains perfection in some latent state. Being unconscious of the illusionary nature of third density, the culture simply has no way to absorb or understand a system in which it is persisted that all that is, including perfection, exists within the self. We have spoken many times about this journey inward. We have spoken about that surface of life that is consensus reality, which, rather than being earth, has more of the quality of the ocean, liquid, penetrable, deep, and capable of being entered by the diver who dives deep, perhaps to gather pearls from the ocean's floor, and to bring up those precious pearls to store away in the treasure house. Our conscientiousnesses have a regular and layered nature. The surface of the ocean of consciousness is that infinitesimal part of yourself that is fully invested in consensus reality. You are as one who floats upon the surface as long as you are content to remain uncurious as to what lies beneath the surface of self. Much of your psychology is content to remain largely upon the surface of self and to work with the structure of the personality. We have called the personality the personality shell to indicate that it is, in a way, a husk which protects a husk which protects the fruit that lies so sweetly within. As long as you feel that you are your personality and are limited by your traits, gifts, and limitations of personality, then you shall float upon the ocean of consciousness, moved forever by the moon's attraction, and washed with the tides that ebb and flow with all the influences on the surface personality. It is our suggestion that you are capable of diving more deeply within the folds of your personality and penetrating at last into deeper waters, which are, although illusionary, far less distorted in their ability to express the truth of the oneness of all creation and the beauty, the truth, and the creatorship within each soul. We can use words like Christ consciousness or cosmic consciousness to help the seeker begin to penetrate the idea that there is an internalized Christhood within each cell of your body and within each iota of your emotions, your mentality, and your spirit. Thusly, we see a journey that slowly develops for each seeker. The beginning of the journey is the awareness that there is more to the illusion than meets the eye. This awareness rouses the seeker and creates a hunger and a thirst for the truth that is missing from consensus reality. There is a flatness perceived to consensus reality. Birth, growth, adulthood, working, marriage, children, friends, getting old, failing in health, and then dying, are all the signposts of the journey across the flat, even if turbulent, sea of consensus reality. However, the seeker becomes aware that this model of life is not accurate or not fully accurate. Once the seeker has awakened to the knowledge that there is infinitely more than this life and these details of life, the seeker can no longer go back to sleep. Once awake, the journey has begun. There are various ways in which the seeker grows as one seeks ever more deeply for the truth about oneself. If the seeker uses the settled religions, which we mentioned earlier, in an attempt to penetrate the truth of oneself and one's relation to the Creator, one is forever dependent upon an other. If the seeker is aware that one is seeking one's deepest self, then there is no other. There is only a growing desire to lay aside each mask, each husk, and each trait of personality that veils from one the deepest truth of one's nature. Yet this is not a mechanical process. There is no stairway to heaven, as the song phrases it. There is only the gentle and continuous intention to allow the dropping away of all those things that keep the awareness from beholding the presence of the one infinite Creator. And this is where surrender and grace re-enter this law of one. For the surrender is to the deeper self, and in surrendering to the deeper truth of the self, the shallower identifications of self with personality traits, plus the accents of birth, race, religion, and so forth, melt away. All distinctions blur beside the presence of the Creator within. It is as though the seeker orbits the self, closer and closer, until finally it is drawn into the heart of self by a kind of spiritual gravity. And suddenly there burst forth an awareness, a satori, a realization, an epiphany. And in that moment, the self is known to the self, and that self is love. Blessed are those moments of grace when all masks fall away and the naked self stands fearless, beholding its own nature, which is sacred and divine. We do not object at all to the seeker's use of otherness. For instance, this instrument works with mystical Christianity and patterns her life after the example of the one known as Jesus the Christ, whom she calls her beloved, whom she calls her beloved, whom she follows, for whom she would die, and for whom she lives. She is aware of the relative impurity of a model which contains the self and an other than the self, yet to contain her devotion and channel it in a productive and positive way, she uses the conventions to which she was born in consensus reality as a conscious being. It is a way to avoid paradox, For the conscious mind, with its rational and logical nature, has a deep distrust and dislike of paradox. And it is certainly paradoxical to say both that the surface self is real and that the deepest and most unitary expression of self is real. Yet that is what we say, knowing that it is a paradox and a mystery.